Televisor English in Quito, Ecuador. I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. A succession of Caribbean leaders have delivered impassioned speeches at the UN. They challenged the global organization to take account of all countries, whatever their size or wealth. Barbados Prime Minister Mia Mottley waded into the global bloc for failing to protect small member states. She says Caribbean countries will no longer be ignored or sidelined.
We in the Caribbean need the world to look again, and in the Pacific, to look again at a commitment of 1.5 degree change, because 2 degrees is calamitous. We need dedicated financing for development in the Addis Ababa Action Plan that speaks to small island developing states. We need the world to recognize that that graph that showed the tipping points cannot reinforce in us our greatest fear, that the world believes that we are dispensable.
She says natural disasters and economic crisis have destabilized these countries. In fact, this reality hit close to home for Prime Minister Mottley, as Barbados is still relying from the effects of Tropical Storm Kirk.
I leave here to cut short my trip to go home to my country. Some may say that in spite of the flooding, we were lucky that Tropical Storm Kirk did not do greater damage. 2 weeks ago in San Francisco, it was Isaac. I say simply that we cannot plan our affairs or that of our people on the basis of luck. It must be on the basis of policy and decisive action, but above all else, on the basis of caring and empathy. I ask the world to pause, and let us get this one right.
And Antigua and Barbuda Prime Minister Gaston Browne also addressed world leaders. He called for a reinvigorated United Nations. Prime Minister Browne says the UN must not be seen as a talking shop which fails to deliver on its promises. It must be made relevant.
Year after year, a few privileged nations are making decisions that impact the livelihood of billions. The exclusive clubs of the G7 and the G20 cannot repair the fragmented international financial system without taking full account of the circumstances and views of the majority of the world's nations. Nor can the Commission of the European Union, which now seeks to impose its own anti-competition high tax policies on developing countries around the world.
He also took aim at powerful nations who imposed high tax policies, threats, and sanctions on other states.
Arbitrary rules set by unrepresentative bodies for their own narrow purposes have no legitimacy in the world. Enforcement of those arbitrary rules by threat and sanctions of the mighty is not legitimate. I hereby make the call once again for a reinvigorated and relevant United Nations General Assembly.
Meanwhile, Antigua and Barbuda is still awaiting a multi-million-dollar financial settlement in a long-running dispute with the United States. The U.S. owes Antigua for U.S. measures against online gambling that harmed the island's economy. Prime Minister Browne lamented the situation at the UN debate.
After 15 years of winning an arbitration at the WTO, my little country is still awaiting an acceptable settlement by the United States to honor its obligation to us. That's right, 15 years later, we're still waiting. The U.S. economy is 20,000 times larger than Antigua and Barbuda's. Compensation for the injury to my small country is less than 0.008% of 1 year of the U.S.'s GDP.
We asked our correspondent in Bridgetown, Kareem Smith, what people in Barbados made of the Prime Minister's speech at the UN.
For people here in Barbados, it is definitely very good to see a new Prime Minister taking a very distinct posture as it relates to the international community and where she focused on the issue of climate change. For us here in Barbados, that is extremely important, given that it has just hit home with Tropical Storm Kirk, a very, very weak system that has caused a bunch of flooding here in Barbados last year. You had Maria in Dominica, you had Irma in Antigua, and really, as she rightfully said, it's not a matter of profits, but this is a matter of life and death. And it seems to be an issue that continues to be shrugged under the carpet as such, and an issue that needs to be addressed to a greater extent by the international community, and a very, very strong call. She makes no words. And I think that that type of leadership is the type of leadership that we need from Caribbean nations and from small island developing states when we approach the international community.
St. Lucia has also suffered heavy rains from Tropical Storm Kirk. Farmers are worried about their crops.
From June up to November, December, we're always fearful that we can have a storm, and which would affect us, okay? But the sad thing about it is many people do not have an insurance, a crop insurance, to cover those losses. And then you have to be a real strong individual every year to go back. It's like a recurrence, Every year you got to go back and replant, and the hurricane season coming again, blow you down again, and you have to start back all over again. Yeah.
And as the debates continued at the UN, St. Kitts and Nevis Prime Minister Timothy Harris also turned his attention to the issue of climate change. He says it has adversely affected the Caribbean and presents an existential threat to its people. He therefore pleads for environmental intervention and assistance from UN members.
The damage the OECS sub-region sustained last year from Hurricanes Irma and Maria was unimaginable. The United Nations High-Level Pledging Conference in the aftermath of these hurricanes was an attempt to chart the way forward in creating resilience and building back better. We ask that the member states with outstanding commitments deal with these as soon as practicable.
He also called for an end to what he described as the UN's discriminatory policies and preferential treatment, which affect smaller UN member states. St. Kitts and Nevis is the smallest country in the Western Hemisphere.
The international community cannot, on one hand, claim to help SIDS, while in the same vein, classify us as middle and high-income countries based on archaic financial models that ultimately deny access to critical developmental assistance and hinder investment financing. We reiterate our calls for the international community to address with urgency the sterile measure of per capita income now employed.
The Prime Minister of St. Lucia made a plea for debt relief in the face of climate change.
St. Lucia remains economically vulnerable to de-risking and the loss of correspondent banking relations, remain out of the reach of any access to concessionary finance. Our reputations are unfairly tarnished by tax labels. We continue to struggle under the weight of international frameworks that do not provide an enabling environment for my country to chart an effective, sustainable development path, or even to be able to take control of our own destiny.
Earlier in the day, China and Russia took the podium in New York. China's Foreign Minister Wang Yi said his country would not be blackmailed by U.S. tariffs imposed on Chinese goods. He also said China is fully committed to the principles of multilateralism, while the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov criticized some Western countries for taking unilateral actions against other countries.
Financial crisis broke out, China chose not to stand idly by, but to work together with other countries to tide over rough times. For years running, China has contributed over 30% of global growth. It has played its part in helping restore global recovery. In the face of new developments and severe challenges, China will keep to its commitment and remain a champion of multilateralism.
International community has to pay a high price for the parochial, self-serving ambitions of a small group of countries. The collective mechanisms of response to common security challenges have stalled. Diplomacy and the culture of negotiations and compromise have been increasingly replaced by dictates and unilateral extraterritorial restrictions put in effect without the consent of the UN Security Council. Such measures, applied already to dozens of countries, are not only illicit but are also ineffective.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
An occasion to enjoy the cultural diversity that defines our South American essence. Come along to find out the story behind these personalities, traditions, and artistic expressions that unite us as a whole. Real Lives. Saturdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The Colombian guerrillas of the National Liberation Army are accusing President Iván Duque of wrecking the possibilities of peace. A communique from the ELN says Duque has repeatedly put obstacles in the way of restarting peace talks. First, he demanded that the ELN unilaterally cease all its insurgent activity, and now he is trying to remove Venezuela as one of the guarantors of the peace process. All this, it says, is tearing up the progress made in the last 5 years. The ELN calls on Colombian society, social movements, political parties, and churches, as well as the Vatican and the international community, to keep pushing for peace in Colombia.
If you want to start talking about the role of the guarantors, you have to start by recognizing the contribution these countries have made in the last 7 years, and the commitment they have shown to support the peace process. We haven't abandoned the talks, and we are not going to. We know that Colombia wants to end the conflict, but the other side needs to provide the guarantees for that to happen.
Social organizations and human rights activists in Colombia have rejected President Iván Duque's speech at the UN. They say that Duque's rhetoric is removed from the everyday reality of the country.
It's really healthy for the President of the UN to say that he's going to work in the peace progress. But what it is incomprehensible is that it doesn't appear with political and budgetary decisions. It's not understood, as in the budget there are additions for the Ministry of Defense to buy anti-aircraft weapons. And on the other hand, there are no resources to guarantee incorporation, and neither in the peace agreements. And it shows an ambiguity in the speech of the President.
It's surprising that in the UN Assembly, Colombia does not say anything about human rights. We have 192 murdered leaders. That is the same figure of 2017. The word human rights did not say about it. I think it was fixed more on problems in Venezuela than in Colombia. In terms of human rights, we have 38,000 displays. Colombia has much to do, and what we are doing is seeing a paradise where there is none.
According to the political and media analyst Federico Garcia, the media has reactivated its intentions to justify a military intervention in Venezuela.
The whole phenomenon of migration is being used to justify a supposed humanitarian crisis that occurs in countries with famine, with genocide, with these kinds of crises. But that is clearly not Venezuela. Although the situation is very difficult, a false image is being created so that in the event that there is need for aggression against Venezuela, it can be done through Colombia and with the support of public opinion.
The voices against the war speech of the Colombian government against Venezuela have been felt in the Senate's Peace Committee.
We have examples of episodes like this that have started with delirious voices that invite military interventions. It has happened recently and they are very painful. And I'm not talking only about Vietnam. There is also Afghanistan, Libya. For God's sake, nobody should have the idea that military intervention in Venezuela is a possibility for Colombia. Just talking about this matter is crazy.
Now the scenario is South America. Under a false humanitarian crisis, the United States intends to convince the world that Venezuela must be intervened in militarily. The true objective is its natural wealth.
Sin duda alguna, a Estados Unidos le interesa controlar, digamos...
Without doubt, the United States is interested in controlling the most important oil foundation in the hemisphere, and the second most important one in terms of gas. The awful stories in Iraq, Afghanistan, and Libya give us a clue of why it's so risky to talk about this possibility.
Un poco luces sobre por qué es tan riesgoso que se empiece a contemplar esta posibilidad.
According to experts, President Duque has to take a concrete political stance on Venezuela and not let his officials speak for him.
Another 92 Venezuelans will head back to their country from Ecuador as part of the Return to the Homeland plan. People are gathering outside the Venezuelan embassy waiting to board the fourth plane bound for Venezuela. The flight is expected to depart sometime on Friday.
I want to congratulate President Maduro for the implementation of this plan because all the Venezuelans who are here have a different stories and unfortunately many of us want to go back. But we don't have the money for it. And now, thanks to President Maduro, I can say that soon I will be in my country.
We came here with many expectations, many of them created by the media, especially the social media. But when we arrived here, we saw that the reality was very different to what was being projected. So when we saw this, we decided it's better to be in our country.
Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has more.
Hello, we are outside the Venezuela embassy in Ecuador, where around 92 people will leave Ecuador today under the Return to Homeland plan implemented by the Venezuelan government, implemented by the President Nicolás Maduro after several allegations of xenophobia and labor exploitation were made public in several countries around the region. Now Ecuador is expected to leave, the fourth plane, and these people will come back finally to their country, to Venezuela, and they will come back to their families. So this is all we have for now. Back to you at the studio.
We thank Denise Herrera for that report. The corruption within the ruling Conservative Party in Paraguay has been exposed. While progressive movements view the investigation into the right-wing party as positive, they warn that changes will only be made if citizens take action.
Ruling party Senator Oscar Daher is in prison. His crimes include money laundering, bribery, and more. For progressive movements, the investigation of such cases is important, but ultimately they would like to do away with a corrupt political system they believe impoverishes the people.
When workers' dignity is not respected, nor their working hours or their holidays or their social security, there is corruption and impunity. All of this is corruption, but it does not reach the news.
The deputy of the ruling party, Ulises Quintana, was also arrested. The public ministry claims he has connections to drug traffickers. Left-wing parties in Congress say that crimes against poor people must also be investigated and reported.
When farmers and indigenous people are rejected from their places for money and politics is corrupted. These also need to be reported again and again.
According to citizens, the arrest of politicians and investigations are the result of social action. For them, the solution to improve their lives and the system lies in spreading awareness.
Corruption is a cancer we can't remove from our country, but we can realize that Paraguayan people already woke up. We are not going to shut up anymore. We now take action. We went from indignation to action.
The National Republican Association, or the Colorado Party, is the political organization that won the election this April, placing Mario Abdo Benitez in the presidency. Politicians from the party are being investigated for corruption by the public ministry.
Pope Francis has defrocked Chilean priest Fernando Karadima, who is at the center of a sexual abuse scandal. This means the Pope has signed a decree removing Karadima from the priesthood. The 88-year-old priest was convicted of sexually abusing minors in 2011. Due to the statute of limitations in Chile, Karadima managed to escape civil justice. 7 Chilean bishops have resigned since June after inquiries were made into the alleged masking of Karadima's wrongdoings. We'll be back very soon. Stay with us.
ليش انت لاجئ؟ لا نحن بلد استقبلنا لاجئين كثير، نعرف شو معنات اللاجئ، بس ما عشنا لحتى اجى اليوم وبلشت الحرب.
او خلقي كشر دروز دكا بس بفكر لمندالي خوي كمندالي بمرض تسيل يدي لابد. امريكا شو بدها بافغانستان او شو بدها من العراق او شو بدها من سوريا او شو بدها من ليبيا او شو بدها من
Sunday, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. U.S. President Donald Trump has ordered the FBI to reopen an investigation into his Supreme Court pick, Brett Kavanaugh. This in light of sexual assault allegations leveled against Kavanaugh. Word of the supplemental probe came just hours after the Supreme Court nominee was approved by the Senate Judiciary Committee. That approval came in the form of an 11-10 vote to advance Kavanaugh's nomination to the full Senate. It was Republican Senator Jeff Flake who set in motion Trump's order to the FBI.
With regard to making sure that we do due diligence here, and I think it would be proper to delay the floor vote for up to, but not more than 1 week, in order to let the FBI continue to do an investigation limited in time and scope.
A huge data breach has compromised the accounts of 50 million Facebook users worldwide. The company says hackers were able to exploit a vulnerability in a feature known as FtS to gain control of people's accounts. The breach was discovered on Tuesday, Facebook said, and it has informed police.
It's our 4th F8.
And 2 earthquakes have hit Indonesia, leading to a tsunami that swept through the village of Palu. The tsunami brought waves of up to 2 meters in height. Buildings were heavily damaged, and officials say at least 5 people are believed to have died. The first earthquake was of magnitude 7.5, striking the island of Sulawesi. 10 aftershocks have followed so far. At a press conference in Germany, the Turkish president and German chancellor discussed economic relations and the case of an imprisoned journalist. Angela Merkel and Recep Tayyip Erdogan took questions from the press about the jailed journalist in Turkey. Erdogan said some journalists have been released, while some cases are proceeding through the courts. While Merkel announced plans for an upcoming meeting between Turkey, France, and Russia on Syria in October. At least 45 people have been killed by cholera in Zimbabwe in the past 3 weeks. More than 90 cases have also been confirmed so far. Most of the deaths have been in and around the capital Harare, and a quarter of victims are children. The authorities have launched an oral vaccine campaign to control the outbreak.
This is an outbreak which was caught us by surprise, I would say, with a rapid increase of cases and, of course, initially deaths as well.
South Africa's Cape Town is to ease restrictions on the use of water by local residents. Starting from the 1st of October, people will be able to use 70 liters of water instead of 50 per day. A severe drought in 2015 placed a strain on water supplies, prompting authorities to restrict its use. Water saving and rain has raised water levels at local dams, allowing for the limit to be lifted. Wrestlers in Mexico are breaking stereotypes in lucha libre. They have a different size, but the same amount of passion. A show known as Micro Stars is becoming more and more popular as it breaks with the traditional image of fighters. Their strength and agility has made them the stars of the show. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.